Hello and welcome to the Reviews Brothers. Back in the day, the PS1 was the best-selling console of its generation and had a total of 3,061 games released for it, according to Google of course. Now, with that many games being released, there are bound to be a ton of games that are fun to play that just flew under the radar, and that's what we're going to be doing in this series that I'm probably going to regret starting. We're going to take a look at 10 hidden gems for every letter of the alphabet. Well, every letter that has 10 games with it anyway. I must shout out Old Style Gamer for inspiring me to do this after his similar series for the Commodore 64 and Amiga. I hope you don't mind me nicking your idea. And anyone that hasn't checked out his channel, make sure you do. It's got some fantastic videos on there. Of course, there's a link in the description below. Now, just to confirm, I'm not saying that these are the best games on the PS1, but they are all games that I don't hear anyone talking about, but are actually pretty good fun and well worth checking out. Now, how about I shut the hell up, you press that subscribe button, and we take a brief look at some games, beginning with the letter A. Here is Assault Retribution, an action game from Telstar where you choose from two sexy buff marines who have to set out to defeat an alien menace. You can choose from either Macho Man Reno Washington or Sexy Kelly Doyle, both of whom are very good at blasting aliens in the face. Each character has their own set of weapons, but other than that they basically play the same. The weapons here are all pretty good too. You've got your standard blasters, spread shots, rockets, lasers, electricity and flame shots, and they're all fun to use and have different uses against different aliens, of which there are many. You tend to have enemies coming at you constantly, but they're never overwhelming, which is good, as it means there's no slowdown. Also, this is a reasonably early PS1 game, so it's not much of a looker, with lots of sharp angles and jagged edges, but I do kind of still like the way it looks, and the way that the enemies fall apart as you blast them is great. The controls here are spot on, which is what you need in a game like this. You can run and jump as well as strafe, and you can also aim up and down with the shoulder buttons, which you'll need to do to take out the flying bastards. And you'll need good control, as there are a few platforming sections in the game too. These are mainly where I would die, but they were never unfair. The scenery here is also quite destructible, causing massive explosions. Most of the time you'll even get some power-ups for blowing stuff up too, so that's always recommended. What's more, you can play this game in 2-player co-op, which I can't do as I have no friends, but this would be a really great game to blast through of an evening. It's not particularly long and can be finished in just a couple of hours. In fact, I managed to beat it after just 3 or 4 tries, but it was loads of fun and a good game to come back to every now and then for some mindless action. It's not groundbreaking in any way, but it is a fun time and worth a look. Advanced VG2 is a one-on-one fighting game with a roster made up entirely of sexy female anime women, and I don't see that as a problem at all. It's got some really good 2D pixel art with some fantastic animation, and if you've ever played Street Fighter, which if you haven't then why not, then you'll be able to pick this one up pretty quickly, as it's got the same sort of inputs and moves, including super moves. There is a story mode, which is all in Japanese, and as far as I can tell, this game never left there, so I never really knew what was going on, but the artwork is great and you can pretty much tell what's going on most of the time. The game even introduces some cool elements during story mode, with some fights not letting you use certain attacks, or fighting 2 different people on each round rather than 1 person for 2 rounds. This is a nice touch and keeps things fresh. The character selection isn't huge, but they do all play fairly differently, but the familiarity is welcome and it makes this game easy to pick up and play. And yep, the controls here are really good too. Moves are easy to pull off and the 6-button configuration works well. It's all responsive and I never had any complaints in the control department. However, the hit detection did sometimes feel a bit off, with some attacks not connecting when I'm pretty sure they should have, but it never really made too much a difference during the fights. 2D fighting games are by far my favourite style, and this one did not disappoint. Give it a go if you can. Now this one is called Aconcagua, or something along those lines anyway. It's from Sony themselves, and it's a really cool survival point-and-click adventure game where you play as a number of characters who have survived a plane crash in a snowy mountain and have to discover who caused the crash and bring them to justice. The story really takes the main stage here, and there's some great cutscenes that are terribly acted, but I still like it. The graphics here are fantastic, and actually probably some of the best I've seen on the PS1. You control the action with a cursor. You just point where you want to go and press the circle button. Hover over things to see if you can interact with them or talk to other characters. Throughout the story, you'll meet new people, and everyone has their own abilities, which is a really cool touch. For example, you might meet a survivor that doesn't speak English, so you've got to switch to the rest of your characters to find one that does speak their language. These little touches are really nice. As you'd expect, there's loads of puzzles, most of which centre around using the right character for the right task, as for example one is good at climbing, one is pretty tech savvy, and so on. You can even talk to every character with every other character whenever you like, and they each exchange different items and hints and different conversations to help you on the way. Now, the puzzles here were never particularly that tough, and you do tend to get everything you need pretty much right when you need to use it, but it does keep the game going at a pretty good pace. What's also interesting though is that your characters can die, so they might not all make it to the end. However, from what I can tell, it is possible to keep all of them alive if you play right, and this gives you an option to go back and try again. There are enemies and hazards throughout the game that you need to avoid, and it can get pretty tricky. I really had an absolute blast playing this game, and the story did really keep me playing. I don't think it was released outside of Japan, but now there's a translation that you can get online, and I highly recommend that anyone that likes cinematic style adventures does give this one a play. Armoured Core is a mech game series from everyone's favourite sadists, From Software, and it's a series that's actually still going strong today, but it doesn't get talked about very often, at least not on the channels that I watch. You of course pilot a robo-dude that's packed to the CPUs with weapons, rocket boosters, and presumably wires. You're given a list of missions to embark on that usually involve blowing up a load of stuff, but occasionally you might need to do something like escorting while blowing stuff up, to keep it fresh. Each mission has reward money, which you can then use to buy new parts for your mech, or Armoured Core as they're called in the game. You can buy everything from new arms, legs and heads to engines, boosters, armour and of course new weapons. Most of these things aren't cheap though, and you'll need to work your butt off if you want to afford everything. And of course, as it's a From Software game, it's not particularly easy to do this. It is a tough game, but it's not unfair. You run around some medium-sized 3D arenas and your weapons will automatically lock onto enemies for you to blast with your lasers or missiles. If you're close enough, you also have a laser sword that you can slash them with for massive damage, but of course you're likely to take a bit of damage yourself when you're doing it. In fact, it's very hard not to take damage here, especially when you first start playing, as strafing, aiming and rocket boosting at the same time is not easy to do, which isn't because of the controls per se. They're not bad, but it's just that you need a different button for every action in the game, so you need about 7 fingers to strafe, aim, jump and shoot all at the same time. Thankfully, you can upgrade your weapons and armour so you can take more of a beating, but be careful as you can't repair at all during the stages. Also, at the end of each mission, you automatically do repair, and you also get all your ammo back, but at a cost which comes out of the reward money automatically. So the more efficient you are in the missions by not taking damage or wasting ammo, the more money you get to keep at the end. I actually really like the way this works, and found the game to be pretty damn addictive. This is the first Armoured Core game that I've played, but I'll definitely be checking out some of the other of the series to see how much better they get. Now you're just going to have to trust me on this next one, as here is Action Man Operation Extreme. This is a surprisingly competent third-person action and driving game. Of course, you play as Action Man, and you set off on a series of missions to stop Professor Gangrene and the other guy, whose name I can't remember, from being bastards. You have a mixture of gameplay elements here, including top-down driving sections, third-person action stages, first-person shooting stages, and surprisingly, they all play quite well. Of course, it's no Metal Gear Solid, but it does kind of try to be, and it is actually quite fun. The game controls well enough, the driving sections are fast and responsive, and you'll be using your missiles to take down enemy vehicles. You've got a variety of things to drive, and they're all basically the same apart from their size though, but they're good enough. Then there's the action stages where you'll be exploring deserts, enemy bases, jungles and other such action places. Here you're given a load of mission objectives and you'll need to find and use various items to complete them. It actually plays kind of like, and is often clearly influenced by, the James Bond franchise, even down to the music, and it actually works quite well. Graphically, the game looks decent enough, though Action Man does always look a bit off to me, though the animation is good and there's a lot of detail in the environments. There's a load of enemies for you to take out too, or capture as the game calls it, but quite how you capture someone by shooting them in the face I'll never know. The combat is a bit clunky, but it works. Some of the enemies put up a decent fight though, and the hand-to-hand combat, it could be better. Your mission objectives are pretty varied and can be tough to figure out, but you do have a map and a radar which help quite a lot, highlighting items, enemies and objectives. Really, this is one of those games that has no right to be as solid as it actually is. You could almost have the Action Man license taken away and a bit of a reskin, and it could be its own thing. I was pleasantly surprised with how well it plays. This is definitely one for Action Man enthusiasts, and worth a peek if you like action spy games. Let's stick with action men and take a look at Agent Armstrong, an action shooter where you play as Agent Armstrong, who has to take on an evil army all by himself. The game has some really cool looking pre-rendered graphics mixed with 3D environments, but it plays more like a 2.5D game. There's some great animation here, and Armstrong controls well, if a little stiff. You're given a map screen which opens up a ton of missions, and as you progress you'll be attacking enemy bases, jungles, deserts and more. A bit like Action Man. Taking out definitely not Nazis. It's all set in a sort of 1940s kind of era, which makes a change, and I really like it. You have one main weapon, which is your machine gun. This uses ammo, which can be powered up to have larger bullets that do more damage, and if you do run out of ammo, you can actually still shoot, but at a much slower rate. You can also collect grenades, missiles, mines and more to help you take out the hundreds of enemies on each level. This is not an easy game, and it very quickly starts to kick your ass with the crazy number of enemies. Thankfully, it's not one-hit deaths, and you do get as many tries as you want. Sadly though, if you do die, you have to go back to the start of the level every time. But the levels themselves aren't particularly long, so it's not the end of the world. You get mission objectives to complete, which range from blowing stuff up to rescuing people or collecting items. Then, interestingly, once you've completed the objectives, you have to get to an extraction point somewhere on the level and then use your flare to call your chopper in to get you. This can be tense, as often by the time you do this, you're low on health and there's enemies spawning in everywhere, which you have to fight off while the helicopter flies in. I actually had this for the PC when it was first released, and I loved it back then. Playing it again now, it is starting to show its age, and there's some things that aren't great, like the fact that you can't move at all while shooting, and you have no shadow. Both of these things make it hard not to take damage, and the lack of shadow makes jumping sections really tough, which leads to some instant deaths, or just a lot of health being drained. But it's still a really fun game that will definitely challenge anyone who gives it a try, which you should. RPG roguelike type thing now with Azure Dreams. Now I'll tell you that I very rarely play these types of games, so take all of this with an absolute beginner point of view. The story here is quite a confusing one, but essentially you're a 15-year-old kid who lives in a town that has a tower full of monsters, and now that you are 15 you can enter that tower to battle the monsters, collect items, and if you're strong enough you can get to the top of the tower and defeat whatever big monster is up there. Oh, and also your dad's gone missing. I bet he's at the top of that tower. Anyway, this game, I have to say, was crap when I first started playing it, but then once I started to get used to how it all worked, I really had a hard time putting it down. Though even after about 10 hours or so of playing, I still don't really understand most of the mechanics. Basically, as far as I can tell, you enter the tower, which is randomly generated every time you enter, and then you have one life to get as far as you can. Each floor of the tower has a lift somewhere in it that you have to find, and that will take you to the next floor. And of course, each floor gets tougher and tougher, but it's alright as you level up as you battle the monsters, and you'll find weapons and items to help you out. What's cool is that you'll also find eggs that you can hatch to have little mates that follow you around, attacking enemies or powering you up. If you die when you're in the tower, you go back to the town and lose everything you found, as well as all of your experience. But in the tower, you can find wind crystals that will teleport you back to town. You'll have to do this so you can sell and upgrade your items, as well as put some in storage if you want to, as you can only enter the tower with a maximum of 5 items at a time, though you can find and carry more once you're inside the tower. Also, in the town, the more money and items you spend and buy, the more developed the town becomes, offering better equipment, more villagers, more buildings, and the game has a surprisingly deep relationship aspect to it, so you can make friends and enemies in the town and dungeon that change things that happen throughout the game. There really is a lot to it. Every time you exit the tower and go back in, even if you haven't died, you always start back at level 1 and have to build up your strength again, but the weapons and items you get stay their level, so that makes progressing a bit faster. Combat is turn-based. In fact, everything is turn-based, sort of. It's one of those games where enemies only move when you move, so you want to strategically place yourself where they'll have a hard time getting to you, and you'll always want to take the high ground when you can. Graphically, I really like how the game looks. It's got a cool pre-rendered characters look with 3D environments, and I don't know why, but I just really like this. Kind of like Agent Armstrong too. Now look, I don't want to keep talking about this game as we do have more to look at, but I will say that the worst thing about it is the English translation, which is just terrible, which is kind of surprising as this game is from Konami, and it's one of the worst I've ever seen. Menus and options often just have the wrong words in them, and it does make it hard to figure out what the game wants you to do, and navigating menus becomes an exercise of trial and error rather than just reading the options. For example, when you go up a floor in the tower, the game asks if you want to quit, but what that actually does is just take you to the save menu, so it should just say save. And to equip an item, you have to choose the equipment option, which is close but still wrong. But in a nutshell, this is still a really fun game, and you'll get used to how it works after a bit of time, and it is very addictive, and if you have a bit of patience, you'll definitely be able to get a lot out of this game. Disney time now with everyone's favourite street rat Aladdin in Aladdin, Nasira's Revenge. Now who the hell is Nasira, you ask? Well, she's Jafar's sister, who may or may not have turned up in the TV series or one of the straight-to-video sequels, I have no idea. So basically this game has the same plot as Die Hard 3 but with a gender swap, and instead of Samuel L. Jackson you have a genie. Nasira has quite easily managed to take over Agrabah and imprison the Sultan and Jasmine, so Aladdin has to set out to stop her and rescue the peeps. This is all done in a 3D action platform game which has some pretty good graphics that are definitely showing their age but are still quite charming. You'll be exploring marketplaces, palaces and a host of other magical locations where you spend most of your time hunting for keys or switches to open doors or activate moving platforms that will let you progress. Of course there's loads of enemies for you to deal with too. Thankfully Aladdin can murder them mercilessly with his sword or a slide attack. You also have apples you can throw at enemies to stun them, opening them up for a bit of disembowelment. What's cool is that you can see that the 16-bit Aladdin games clearly influenced this one quite a lot, and it does kind of feel like a sequel to those games and does it pretty damn well. The controls are good, but not perfect. Sometimes the platforming sections can be tricky, thanks to the camera which can be a pain, but for a game that you'd expect to be utter crap, it's pretty damn solid. The music is actually great and really fits, and the voice actors do a decent enough job. You've got Dan Castellaneta as the genie here, which I believe he also was in the TV series and any movies that Robin Williams wasn't around for, and he does a good job. However, there really were times where it sounds like Homer is talking to you about bananas and Abu and not the genie. The levels here are filled with things to collect, mainly coins and gems. Thankfully you don't have to collect them all, but you will get extra lives and access to mini-games in between levels if you do. These will give you extra lives, so sometimes it's worth it. These are always actually quite fun, and usually take the form of a 2D platform game where you control another character like Abu or Jasmine. In fact, something that's cool in this game is that you actually do get proper levels where you play as other characters as part of the main story. As you'd expect though, the game does have a bit of jank to it, mainly when it comes to some of the hit detection, which can make the combat tricky at times, but I never actually died too often because of it. This is another game that really surprised me with how much I liked playing it, and I would recommend giving it a go, which I guess is pretty obvious as it's in this video. If you prefer your 3D action adventures to be a little darker, then you need to check out Akuji The Heartless. This is a tale of revenge after Akuji and his wife have been murdered, but thanks to the power of voodoo, you get the chance to get out of the underworld, and it turns out that you come from a family of bastards, and the ruler of the underworld hates them. So he makes a deal with you that if you kill and collect enough of their spirits and souls, some of which have turned into grotesque monsters, then he'll send you back to the land of the living along with the missus. Now, I don't know about you, but that's one of the coolest stories in a video game that I've heard. You'll be exploring some pretty big 3D levels that are packed with grim enemies and traps that you'll need to deal with. And on the way, you'll find some spirits of your family in the form of shrunken heads. You need to collect enough of these to open up the doors to the main evil family members, which act as the bosses. So essentially, the shrunken heads act like stars in Mario. There's also loads of voodoo spells to collect. These are pretty much your attacks. You've got blades attached to your wrists at all times, which are your main attack, and these work well enough, but the voodoo spells act as your projectiles, and you should really get used to using them. These are actually really cool and range from single shots to rapid fire and massive exploding fireballs. At first I tried to save them and not use them until I needed to, but you soon learn that they're often your best option for dealing with enemies, and they're pretty plentiful in the levels. Also, any spells that you collect in the levels can only be used in that stage, so you don't actually keep them when you finish the level, so yeah, you might as well use them as much as you can. The graphics here are really good with a cool dark look to everything. Thankfully you can actually still see what's going on, but when the camera's not being a dick, which to be fair, it wasn't that often. The character designs are great and the bosses are massive, and most of the animation here is good, apart from your melee attack, which is that weird fast animation that a lot of games of this era had that just looks a bit odd. But this is still a really cool game with a great premise and some tricky gameplay. The camera is a little wonky, and there's some really frustrating platforming sections that are tough because of the camera and some iffy control, but really these are few and far between, and for the most part exploring the levels to find hidden areas with shrunken heads is good fun. This actually was made by the guys that made the Tomb Raider games, and you can kind of see the influence there, but the controls thankfully aren't tank controls, so if you press left, you'll go left. This is well worth adding to your collection. And finally for today, here is Asuka 120% Burning Fest Final, which is the stupidest name of this video. This is another 2D beat-em-up with an all-female lineup, and before you report me to the police, hear me out, as this is another really good fighting game that's more than just sexy women. What is, I guess, a little bit creepy is that it is set at a school, but from the looks of the characters, it's a school for adults, so it's okay. Each character basically represents a different school subject, and their attacks and looks are all based around this. So you've got various sport-looking characters as well as a science character, and actually, come to think of it, the rest of them are sports-based. Once again, you've got some really good 2D sprites which have some fantastic animation, and the control scheme is once again Street Fighter style, so you'll be doing quarter circles and charge attacks in no time, and they all work well. This game is all about the combos too. Fights actually last quite a while, with characters having a decent sized health bar, and it was actually common that I'd run out of time before beating my opponent, though this could be because I'm not very good at it. I found with this game that going on the all-out offense was always my best option, and I did find combos with each character that worked really well, and I had a blast to figure out which moves and best playstyle for each of the characters was. I especially like the wrestling woman, whose name I don't know, as all of the text and voices are in Japanese. That's right, this is another one that I don't think left Japan. It's a shame though, as each character has their own story, and it would have been cool to see what was going on. But really, this is one of those games where that really doesn't matter, as the fighting action is solid, and it's only Belt Buckle Bill who cares about the story in a fighting game anyway. But that shouldn't stop you from trying it out, especially as we all know most of us aren't playing these games on the real hardware anyway. So yeah, go find this game and give it a try. I would say that Advanced VG2 is the better game of the two, but this is still a very good time. So there you go, 10 PS1 Hidden Gems beginning with the letter A. Now there's so many games out there that I've never played, so please let me know what other games there are out there that I should try. I will be covering every letter of the alphabet, so be sure to comment your suggestions for games I should include in those videos. On screen now you can see where you can follow us, so please do so. We've got loads of cool content for you to enjoy. Now all that's left for me to say is thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.